My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 37 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believe being the dependable one was the closest thing my family had to a love language. But everything changed the afternoon I watched my 11-year-old nephew Ethan deliberately ruin the handmade graduation quilt I had spent 6 months sewing for my daughter Sophie, while my older brother Ryan stood nearby smiling, as if the whole thing were an entertaining family joke. The quilt had been made from pieces of my late husband Michael's old flannel shirts, scraps from our daughter Sophie's baby blanket, and fabric from the tiny blue curtains that hung in the first apartment we rented together in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So when Ethan poured an entire bottle of bright red sports drink across it during our backyard celebration and Ryan casually said, "Relax, Claire, it's just fabric," something inside me finally stopped negotiating because I suddenly understood that the ruined quilt was not the real disaster. The real disaster was the invisible system I had spent 5 years funding, protecting, and pretending was called family. I owned a small bookkeeping and payroll company in Cedar Rapids, and because I was good with numbers, everyone had gradually decided that my ability to balance accounts meant I was also responsible for balancing everybody else's life, which began after Michael died unexpectedly from a heart condition and continued through 5 years of school fees, car repairs, rent shortfalls, medical copays, vacation deposits, utility bills, and temporary loans that somehow became permanent the moment I stopped asking when they would be repaid. My brother Ryan had always been treated as the family's golden child because he was charming, confident, and once promised our parents he would build a successful landscaping business, while I was the quiet daughter who earned scholarships, worked evenings, paid her own bills, and learned early that whenever something went wrong, someone would eventually look at me and say, "Claire can handle it." And because my parents helped watch Sophie after school, and because I could not bear the thought of my daughter losing the only grandparent she had left, I kept transferring money, covering expenses, and swallowing resentment until the total amount quietly passed $60,000 without a single person ever sitting me down and asking whether I could afford to keep rescuing them. The confrontation began 3 weeks before the ruined quilt when my mother announced during Sunday lunch that Ryan had found an opportunity to expand his landscaping company into commercial contracts. But instead of asking whether I wanted to contribute, she placed a folder beside my plate and said, "You have savings, Claire, and this could finally put your brother on solid ground." While Ryan leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone already spending money that did not belong to him, I closed the folder, looked directly at both of them, and said, "I'm not paying for this." And the silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the refrigerator humming in the next room. But my mother eventually smiled in that polished, disappointed way she used whenever she wanted me to feel selfish and replied, "You don't have to decide today," which I knew was not an acceptance of my answer but a warning that she intended to keep applying pressure until I surrendered. So for the first time, I did something that terrified me more than disappointing my family. I went home, opened every bank statement, gathered every transfer record, and created a 5 year financial history of everything I had paid. The numbers were worse than I expected, not because I had forgotten individual payments, but because seeing them together transformed hundreds of small acts of generosity into one enormous pattern. And beneath the total were expenses I had completely stopped questioning: Ryan's business insurance, my mother's dental work, my father's replacement furnace, my nephew's private school fees, a family beach rental, three overdue credit card payments, two car repairs, groceries delivered during Ryan's slow season, and even a $2,400 deposit for a company trailer that my brother had promised to reimburse after the next contract, which had never happened. I did not send anyone the spreadsheet that night because I wasn't interested in humiliating them or proving that I had been right. Instead, I changed every automatic payment connected to another adult, canceled the credit card I had allowed my mother to keep for emergencies, moved my savings into an account only I could access, and wrote one simple sentence on a sheet of paper beside my laptop: "Helping people should never require abandoning myself." And when Sophie walked into the kitchen wearing Michael's old sweatshirt and asked why I looked sad, I told her the truth without giving her the details. Sometimes people get so used to receiving that they forget the person giving also has limits, and she nodded thoughtfully before saying, "Then maybe they need to learn where the limit is." The following Saturday should have been a celebration, but it became the moment the entire family finally revealed what they thought I was worth. Because after Sophie's school ceremony, we gathered at my house for dinner, and while everyone was congratulating her, my nephew Ethan suddenly grabbed the quilt from the back of a chair, poured red sports drink across it, and laughed when the color spread through Michael's old fabric like a stain through a photograph, while Ryan watched without stopping him, and my mother immediately stepped forward with the same sentence she had used for years whenever someone hurt me: "Don't make a scene. Claire, he's only a child." I looked at the ruined quilt, then at Sophie, who was standing completely still with tears filling her eyes, and instead of shouting, I walked over to my daughter, wrapped my arms around her, and said, "This is not your fault, and we are not going to let someone else's behavior decide what today means." before turning toward my family and adding, "But something has changed tonight, and I think all of you should know that the money, favors, payments, and rescues stop here." And Ryan actually laughed because he apparently believed I was bluffing until I told him, "You don't owe me anything from the past, but from this moment forward, every adult in this family is responsible for their own life." And my mother responded, "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." The exact sentence that finally made me realize the debt had never been mine to begin with. That night, I repaired what I could of the quilt, not because the damage could truly disappear, but because I wanted Sophie to see that something broken could still become meaningful. And while the needle moved through the stained fabric, my father unexpectedly called and admitted that he had known for years how much money I had been giving everyone, but had stayed silent, because keeping peace had always seemed easier than challenging my mother and Ryan, before quietly telling me, "I thought you were strong enough to survive it, and I was wrong to make your strength an excuse for my silence," which was the first apology from my family that did not contain a request attached to it. 2 months later, Ryan's business finally collapsed under debts he had been hiding, and my mother called me at 7 in the morning asking me to transfer money for payroll, but I calmly told her, "I hope he finds a solution, but I am not the solution anymore." And when she threatened to cut me out of holidays and told me that Sophie would lose her grandparents if I continued being difficult, I answered, "You are free to make whatever choice you believe is right, but I will not purchase access to my own family." And then I ended the call before she could turn my boundary into another argument. A year later, Ryan was working for a commercial landscaping company and slowly rebuilding his finances. My mother had finally learned that an emergency fund was something she needed to maintain herself. My father had become the person who picked Sophie up from school every Thursday because he wanted to spend time with his granddaughter rather than because someone had arranged it for him. And Sophie and I had finished restoring the quilt by replacing the worst damaged sections with new fabric, while keeping one small red stain in the corner as a reminder of the day everything changed. The strangest part was that my family did not suddenly become perfect. Nobody delivered a dramatic apology at Christmas, and there was no magical moment when everyone admitted I had been right. But my life became lighter because I stopped measuring love by how much I could sacrifice. And when Sophie eventually asked why I kept the damaged corner instead of throwing it away, I smiled and told her, "Because some scars are useful when they remind you never to confuse being loved with being used." And that became the lesson I carried forward. Generosity is beautiful when it is freely given, but the moment love becomes an invoice that someone expects you to keep paying, it is no longer generosity. It is control. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.